Today, we're going to pry open a window into the past, and I mean a raw, unfiltered window, through Donald Lowrie's 1912 book, My Life in Prison. Now, this isn't just some historical document, it's a first-hand report from inside the walls of San Quentin. And believe me, it paints an absolutely brutal picture of what the system was like over a century ago. Just let that sink in for a second. This one sentence, right here, it's the heart of his entire experience. It wasn't about the crime he committed, it wasn't even about the conviction. It was this sudden, terrifying realization that he'd been stripped of his own humanity. So, how does a person even get to a point like that? Let's go back to the beginning of his story.
You see, before he was a prisoner, Donald Lowrie was just a guy, a man pushed right to the very edge. And his story, it doesn't start with some grand evil plan. It starts with simple, crushing desperation.
Lowrie makes this really crucial distinction right from the get-go. He talks about two kinds of criminals, the professionals and then what he calls criminals of circumstance. And he puts himself squarely in that second group. He describes being completely broke, just miserable, with nothing to his name but a single nickel that had a hole in it. I mean, it was literally worthless. For him, burglary wasn't about getting rich. It was a desperate last-ditch effort to reclaim what he felt was his basic right to live.
And just like that, this is what he became. The second he walked into San Quentin, his name, his past, his entire identity, poof. It was just gone, erased. He talks about this piece of tin being pinned to his chest, stamped with this number. He wasn't Donald Lowrie anymore. He was inmate 19093.
And the moment he truly felt he'd ceased to be human wasn't even in the main prison. It was in the county jail waiting. He sees this insect crawling on his sleeve, something so disgusting he said it made his blood feel like a slimy snake. That tiny moment, plus the sight of the prison cemetery on the ride in, just rows and rows of plain whiteboards with black numbers stuck in this dirty yellow earth, that was his real welcome. That was the horror showing its face for the first time.
So that initial shock, that feeling of being erased, it just bleeds right into the daily routine. Lowrie shows us how, from a distance, the prison might have looked almost peaceful, but that was a complete illusion, a mask hiding something truly rotten to the core.
There's this incredible, brutal irony he points out. On his very first day, he's struck by this beautiful flower garden, but then he finds out who the gardeners are. Inmates with consumption, lifers, whose lives were being deliberately extended just so they could suffer their punishment longer. So this surface-level beauty was actually hiding this deep-seated misery. Men were forced to shovel down their food in just 12 minutes, which led to all sorts of chronic stomach problems. And they slept under these awful blankets that were basically quilted with newspaper and crawling with bedbugs. The day-to-day existence was just a constant assault on the senses. The water buckets, they were almost never cleaned, just refilled, leaving this nasty, slimy film inside. You got one single pint of oil that had to last you through the long, dark nights. And Lowrie describes watching new prisoners. At first, they'd just nibble their food, disgusted. But after a few months of starvation, they'd transform, eating, in his words, like a hog. Life just became this endless, monotonous parade of striped uniforms marching in line.
This quote really gets to the psychological damage. Lowrie tells a story about asking a Chinese inmate how long he'd been locked up. And the man doesn't answer in years, no. He gives him the exact number of days, a number he updates every single morning with this weird sense of pride. Think about that. His entire life, his whole existence had been boiled down to nothing more than making a tally mark.
But beyond that daily grind, there was a whole other level of hell waiting for anyone who stepped out of line. The solitary ward, the dungeon, and its tools of torture. The story of another inmate, Ed Morrell, really shows you just how far that cruelty could go.
Now, this wasn't just a straitjacket like you might imagine for restraining someone. No, this was a tool designed purely for agony. It was made of heavy canvas and laced so incredibly tight that a man could barely get any air into his lungs. And if you tried to brace yourself, puff out your chest, the guards would just pull the laces even harder. And when you finally had to exhale, the constriction could literally cause paralysis. This is what Ed Morrell told Lowrie when he asked about the marks on his back. While he was cinched up in that jacket, gasping for air, a guard kicked him repeatedly right over the kidneys. The physical scars, he said those were nothing. It was the memory of the torment, of the devil prodding him, that stuck. I mean, just stop and think about that. 5 years.
5 years of such complete and total isolation that the actual physical ability to speak just wasted away. Lowrie tells us that when Morrell finally got out of solitary, he had to learn how to talk all over again. His voice was gone, just from not using it. It's a terrifying look at what that kind of solitude can literally steal from a human being.
The horror wasn't always direct, though. It was in the air. It was ambient. Lowrie writes that the sounds of men being tortured down in the dungeon were this constant, faint backdrop to everyone's life. He describes the screams as being so muffled and distant, they sounded like they were coming from the very bowels of the earth. Imagine that, a sound that just haunted the entire prison population, day in and day out.
And that brings us to the final, state-sanctioned act of brutality at San Quentin. Lowrie gives us this chillingly detailed, almost clinical account of the gallows and the methodical process of a legal execution.
What's so disturbing is how scientific it all was. The gallows was built for efficiency, with 3 notches for hanging 3 men at once. Lowrie describes the special hangman's knot as looking like a coiled snake, just waiting to strike. And the ropes themselves, they were made of this special hard hemp, and they were stretched with heavy weights for over a year to make sure there was absolutely no give. This wasn't just punishment, it was a science of killing.
The whole process was just this cold, dehumanizing ritual. It started days before the execution, when the condemned man was tapped on the shoulder and taken away to be measured for his death clothes. There was no emotion. It was just a series of mechanical steps, one after the other, all leading to that final moment when the trapdoor was sprung.
And the effect this had on the rest of the inmates was profound. Lowrie explains that the first execution a prisoner witnesses, it's sickening. It makes them physically ill, but over time, a kind of numbness sets in. And he makes this really powerful comparison. Just like a worker in a slaughterhouse, the prisoners become desensitized, completely inured to the horror of state-sanctioned death.
So all of this, the dehumanization, the filth, the torture, the executions, it all led Donald Lowrie to a really powerful conclusion about the entire penal system he was trapped inside. And there it is. This is Lowrie's central point. A system that's built on revenge, on making a person suffer. It doesn't reform anybody. All it does is teach hate. And he's clear, he's not writing this book to propose some 10-point plan for prison reform. He's writing it to scream, from the inside, that the system itself is a catastrophic failure. It's a machine that only produces more pain and more anger.
And that leaves us with the very same question Lowrie was asking over 100 years ago. By showing us the unvarnished truth of a prison designed for pure punishment, he forces all of us to ask, can cruelty ever, ever be a path to correction? It's a question that, honestly, feels just as relevant today as it did back in 1912.